And welcome back, folks, to another episode of the Planet Mullins podcast. We're in season 7, and today I'm super happy to have Robert Thies, who's an amazing classical pianist who also does improvisation on his own, which I just found out during the phone call earlier today. But Robert, welcome to the show. How are you, man?
Thank you. I'm great. It's really great to talk to you, Rob. I've known about you for 40 years, so this is really cool.
Wow, this it is really cool. You know, I found out about you just through Danae Vlasse, and we'll just start right there. Now,
Sure.
you've been her pianist, and for people that don't know how classical music works, and I think Robert's mostly in classical, usually the pianist is interpreting works by composers, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
how did it come about that Danae, who's obviously a Grammy winner, Grammy-winning master composer, how did she find you to interpret her stuff, and how did this amazing journey begin for you?
We met through a common acquaintance, actually, one of the sopranos on both of these albums, Hila Plitman, and I did a performance, and Danae came to that, and that's how we met. And before her first Mythologies album, she did an album of art song called Poem that Hila recorded, and Hila encouraged Danae to have me play the piano for that recording. So that's how the relationship began.
Okay, so you've done now 4 albums with Danae, or 3?
This is the third we did, yeah.
But you played on the Grammy-winning Mythologies I, which is cool.
Yep.
And then what's amazing now is for Mythologies 2, you went to frickin' Abbey Road, man. Come on, I hate you. I'm so jealous.
Yep.
Abbey Road in London with an orchestra?
Yeah, I was pinching myself. It was a surreal experience for sure.
I
I mean,
mean,
this room, Rob, I've known about this room for decades because John Williams is one of my heroes, and he
oh,
recorded Star Wars and Superman and Harry Potter, all these uh, incredible, iconic film scores in that room. So I was just looking up at the screen and knowing where John was standing in the room when he recorded that stuff. So it was really cool to be in that place.
that had to be totally surreal. And then on the piano that you played on, was that because in jazz, you know, you go to Blue Note Tokyo and the
Right.
piano's signed by Herbie and by Chick and
Yeah.
me and you know all these people. Is the How did you like the piano? Did you get to
Oh, it's
pick which one?
beautiful. I mean, this was Abbey Road's main room, so
Okay.
yeah, that room's gonna have a great Steinway, and that's yeah, I love the instrument. It's great when an instrument works with you and doesn't fight you. You can actually focus on the music you're playing instead of is that note gonna play, kind of thing.
I had to put towards the end of the 80s, being on the road as a jazz guy, it got so bad we had to put 88 working keys in the contract.
Yep, no kidding. No, I played a recital a couple weeks ago where one of the notes, A flat, I think, wasn't playing. And so immediately, that's all I can think about. How am I supposed to focus on making music when I know as soon as I get to that key, it's not going to play?
It's going to
So,
be
yeah.
thump.
Yeah,
Da
it's
da 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 thump. Da da
yeah,
thump da.
exactly. So
Well,
your focus is completely taken away.
well,
It's
you know,
really
one of the things that the reviewers say about you that's so kind of impressive and miraculous, because I've never watched you play, I haven't seen the videos, but I've heard you play, and I have to agree with the reviewers that you're one of those types of pianists that's really about just bringing the attention to bringing the music to life and not drawing all the attention to you and your persona. Is that just kind of
thank
your
you.
personality, or did you have to work at that?
No, I mean it's very important to me. I take offense when I see people doing these histrionics of the keyboard and bringing attention to them rather than the music that I came to hear. It should be we should be there to serve the music and
Mm.
not to serve ourselves. So that's always been something very important to me. And it's funny, Rob. I mean, this is moving to a different subject, but
That's okay.
like I did a recording for a film composer a couple months ago, and then I ran in his home. It was a private recording, and about a week later, I ran into him in some industry event. And he was looking at me kind of perplexed, like, "Do I know you?" It's like I just spent 5 hours with you, you know. So I mean, in a way, it's a success, and it comes back to what we were just talking about because if I, you know, my face is forgettable or something, fine, whatever. As long as the music was communicated in an effective way, that's more important to me. Actually,
Well,
yeah, I was
yeah,
gonna say
no, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I have a funnier story to share in that
Cool.
I played a concerto with an orchestra once. I don't remember which piece it was, but I after it was over, I was backstage and the orchestra people were putting their instruments away, and somebody from the audience came backstage and greeted me and was just piling on the compliments, very sweet, just about everything, you know, the tone quality, this and that. And then the person talking to me pauses for a second, looks at me and says, "You're the oboe player, right?" And I said, "No, the oboe player is over there." And they said, "Oh, sorry," and left. So there I was, a concerto soloist, you know, taking their attention for 30 minutes, and they still couldn't log who I was.
Well, it's a funny story, but just as a composer who's had many of his pieces butchered throughout his lifetime, being me, it's a very honorable position that you take as a person worried about bringing the music to life. Because going back to the histrionics, we could never forget all the grunting and groaning of Keith Jarrett, and we can't forget the "Hey, I'm riding a pony in the on the meadow." That's Lang Lang,
Uh-huh.
and in jazz, even probably in all the genres, I'm always trying to stress to the members of my band, whoever they might be that night, that it's an ensemble and we're trying to bring the song to life.
Right.
It's not about, man, I can play so many more extra notes on the bass and I'm going to solo, for an hour and all that. And especially in your reviews, it's review after review, the Brahms and the Prokofiev and all this, people just saying that the music is just so alive, but you're not bringing all the attention to you.
Right.
It's
Well, I
just,
mean, yeah, I mean, and you know this much better, but when you play with your bands, it's about the communication you have with each other and the sort of musical relationship and conversation that's happening on stage. And when you connect, when you're in that zone together, it's beautiful. It feels it. I mean, that's the real deal, as opposed to now we're gonna let this guy show off in his solo. I mean, what's more beautiful is, you know, the way you would comp underneath somebody as he's soloing and that kind of communication that's going on. That, you know, I've been a fan of Chick Corea for years, and I was talking to a colleague of mine who said, you know, as amazing as Chick's solos might have been, where his real strengths were the comping for other people during their solos, and that's a
right.
real compliment. It's a testament to his personality. So
No, yeah, absolutely. Well, I was honored to be the pianist at the Carnegie Hall Chick Corea tribute with Hubert Laws.
nice.
And everything about that was great except the fact that we did it as a trio with no drummer.
Oh,
And it was over Zoom from Hubert's mansion. And we were playing all of Chick's fastest possible tunes with no drums or percussion.
wow.
And, the Chick was such a great drummer and his timing was so amazing. And I wanted to ask you about, did you develop your sense of rhythmic perception and your precision from listening to drums or playing drums ever? Because many of the classical pianists, rhythm could be their weakest area.
Mm. No, you're right. I mean, well, I will say that growing up, I had interests outside of classical music. My
Okay.
dad, my dad was an amateur jazz musician, so those records were playing in the house often. I kind of got into jazz more through the ECM label, the European jazz artists first, because that music, it was clear that those musicians were classically trained, and their approach
Right.
to the instruments were something about their sound really appealed to me. So
Hmm.
I kind of got into jazz that way.
I see.
So yeah, I was listening to many kinds of music, and when I'm not sitting at the piano, studying a score for hours upon hours, when I listen to music, it's often not classical music.
Hmm.
So I find inspiration in many different types. I thank you for suggesting that I have a good sense of time. To me, it's always been a struggle. I've been a frustrated jazz musician all my life because I admire what you guys do, and
Yeah.
to the point where I would never call myself one, out of respect to you guys that really truly are the embodiment of what it is to be a jazz musician. I have a love for the idiom, and I did record a jazz album about 11 years ago, which is still sitting on an engineer's desk. I don't know if you'll ever see the light of day,
That's hilarious.
but yeah, so that had a bass drummer and a bass player and a drummer on the recording, of course. So
Right. Well, when it comes to here's something I always wanted to ask you, even if it weren't in an interview setting, since all of the notes are specifically given to you and all these things like, with Danae and the concertizing that you do, how, since you can't just put your own notes in, because that's why I always failed as a classical person,
right,
as I would go, 10 bars into Bach or Beethoven, I'd say, but that sounds so much better with a +9.
exactly, yeah,
Right?
I get it.
But you have the restriction of having to play the composer's notes. Is that harder to interpret or bring your own sense of self, or you're just trying to kind of zen yourself out of the way?
It's certainly a discipline. Um, And yes, we are taught to treat the score as sort of the Bible and
Okay.
to honor every slur, every staccato, every articulation mark, dynamic, and to absorb all that, put it to memory, ideally, and
Hmm.
perform that stuff. So, I mean, yes, we are interpreters, I suppose, and our personalities will come through in our performance. Ravel had an interesting quote. He tells us, he says, "You don't need to interpret my music. You just play it. You just play what's on the score. The
Okay.
interpretation happens if you follow what he asked for. Um, the interpretation will happen."
Wow.
And often when we're teaching students too, we sometimes try to discourage them from trying to put too much of themselves into the music. Just play it. Your personality will shine on its own rather than adding rubati or something that the composer didn't ask for. Or if a student wants to do that, you have to encourage them to sort of give a good reason for why they are adding something that the composer didn't ask for. And if
Okay.
they have a good musical reason, then it's a valid interpretation.
Wow, that's cool. And for those of you that are just finding out about Robert and classical, ribati is not three instances of rhubarb tea, like three cups of rhubarb
Sorry.
tea. It means you're slowing down more than one time in different places, right?
Speeding up, slowing down,
All
yeah,
right.
playing with the tempo, yeah.
Well, let's go right to a question I always wanted to ask guys like you, because my only orchestral experience was in college when I was playing baritone sax in an all-state orchestra doing Gershwin's American in Paris, where the only piece of the whole concert was just that had saxophones was American in Paris. So I'm sitting in this orchestra and I was thrilled because the sound of just all those live people doing all this amazing stuff, right? But the timing, the baton would go down and nothing would happen for a while.
Mm.
Like, don't conductors have to find some way to kind of be, what is it, 20 or 30 milliseconds in advance, and then the sound all starts later? How, explain that. I never understood that.
It differs with every conductor or different orchestras. It is a very bizarre thing to witness, to see a conductor's baton go down, and like you said, there's many milliseconds passing before you actually hear the sound come from the orchestra. Some conductors are more precise, you know, and I'm not an orchestral musician. I mean, I've done my share of that stuff, but I can't speak to it as well as regular orchestral musicians can, as to
Hmm.
when are you with the baton, when you were just behind it. It's a bizarre phenomenon. But in either case, the point is that the conductor needs to lead, whereas in some less professional situations, you'll see conductors sort of follow what they're hearing.
Oh, wow.
And when that happens, the tempo tends to drag and get slow down because you're going with it on. So yeah, it's
Well,
important.
well, on Mythologies, though, someone was conducting, right?
Right. We had a conductor. That's right.
And how many strings?
I don't remember the numbers. It was a slightly reduced orchestra, maybe somewhere between 60 and 70 musicians we had. And I fought hard to have the piano placed in the middle of the room with the strings around me, or on each side. I mean, the wind players were like 5 feet behind me.
Okay.
I wanted to be in the ensemble, and this really made the engineers nervous because they wanted to separate the piano, which
Oh,
I
right.
understand. They wanted, you know, maximum control over separation of sound.
Right.
But I had to convince them that we needed to think also about the quality of the ensemble playing. And
Mm.
I convinced them that if you let me sit where I want to sit, the ensemble, the performance will be so good that there will be so little mixing that has to be done.
Wow.
And it also turned out to be beneficial too because I was facing the conductor, so the conductor and I had direct line of
Oh,
contact.
that's huge. That's huge.
Exactly, rather than, you know, some of the engineers wanted me in concerto position behind the conductor, and then there wouldn't have been that communication, or he would have had to turn away from the score. So this way, I could help show the conductor what the tempi of the different sections of the piece were, because I knew Danae's score really well. We had recorded a chamber version of the album actually
Oh, preparation.
before we went to London. We recorded and edited and even mixed much of the chamber album. So all the tempo changes, and there are many, were just ingrained, and I knew what to do. So it was nice, Rob, because I had string players like the concertmaster and principal second, viola, you know, the principals of the sections, kind of turning their chairs a bit so that they could have eye contact with me, because
Great.
I was showing where the pulses were, because it has to happen quickly, and we were under the gun with time constraints, of course.
Of course, at Abbey Road, I mean, you can't just stick around long enough to wait for the Beatles to get back together with.
Exactly. I
I
mean, we
mean,
had a lot of music to record in a short time, so I we all felt that pressure to really do things right immediately and not warm up into them. So
right. Well, what I just think is I marvel at this kind of stuff because there's so much information that everybody has to remember. And as a pianist in the groups that I'm in, there are these extra expectations. Like you're supposed to know how to comp behind every person in the band. You're supposed to know how to do a piano reduction of playing the melody and playing a bass part and playing chords and playing a piano part all at once.
mhm.
And you're supposed to be able to kind of just do everything. And then everybody looks at you when it's time to write the charts. There's
Mhm.
all these, expectations. But how the heck do you remember all that stuff? It's so many notes, man. I mean, did you have time to commit most of it to memory, or did you really have to focus on the score?
Well, I mean, as you know, with most of these projects, things usually get pushed to the last moment. So, for many reasons, the orchestrators had to work extremely fast, very late. So we were getting, I mean, it was right off the ink hadn't dried yet, basically, for
Right.
for some of these scores. So when I finally was given the piano part, because it was slightly different from the chamber version, because now that it's been orchestrated, I wasn't playing everything. I
All
was
right.
still, I was still playing. There was a note, a request of the orchestrators to basically leave the piano part as is, but there were moments where we gave some of the lines to the other players. Very of course that needs to happen. So
Right.
my part was different. So right up to the moment we're recording, I was writing in fingerings and chord symbols and doing everything I could to make my part ready to go. It was last minute preparation. In fact, when we were in London the few days prior to the recording, I visited a piano store somewhere in London to practice the new
Right.
part. So yeah, I mean,
And you
basically I knew.
you walked up to the piano store and said, "Hey, I'm that oboe player from the from that one gig," and they're like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, come on in and play some piano." Well,
So
we're
I mean,
about go ahead.
no, I was just gonna share. I mean, Danae is an amazing pianist herself, and she grew up taking, studying piano performance as I did. So she's ensconced in, I mean, in the romantic piano literature of Rachmaninoff, Chopin, and Liszt, and so her writing is very piano heavy.
Uh-huh.
The pianist is covering 92% of the musical material. So
Right.
there's a huge responsibility there, and in her pieces, probably 50% of every one of these works is just instrumental. The
Right.
vocals aren't even there. So she does so much of the storytelling uh, instrumentally, and that comes from her background, my background, from studying music that had no lyrics, that had no libretto or whatever you want to call
Uh,
it, and making sense and telling stories with just the instrumental music.
yeah, I've always leaned more towards the instrumental music to the point of where in the '90s I got really into the rhythm and the grooves and the sounds of rap music, early rap and hip hop, and I was doing all these beats and these grooves and stuff, and I was attracting a lot of black artists to my studio and everything, and I was like, yeah, man. I talked to this one friend of mine a couple of years later, and he said, all of that stuff that you're doing is really great, but you do know that there's a community and ideology and an entire social thing outside of these beats that's about gun violence and the police and
Mhm.
drug dealing and
Yeah,
theft and and I said, oh yeah, man, I guess I never did listen to any of the rappers rapping
yeah.
because I wasn't interested in that part. I was just interested in the rhythmic thing. But did you guys have the singers overdub with you, or were they singing live too?
They were singing live. They were in ISO booths.
Okay.
So yeah, that was definitely happening at the same time. But yeah, I mean, her, her music, it's hard to categorize it because as soon as you have singers, one thinks of it as vocal music,
Uh-huh.
which it is. I mean, is this art song? Is it opera? But because of what I was mentioned earlier about such a huge percentage of the music being simply instrumental storytelling,
Right.
it's almost like these are orchestral tone poems
Oh,
feature singers as well. It's kind of, to me, it's almost closer to like a Mahler Fourth Symphony that's basically an orchestral work, but then it has a vocal soloist in the last movement.
all right. Well, now going back to the album credits and stuff, you're a co-producer on this album, and before, like in Mythologies I, you didn't play piano on all the songs, but this time your role was elevated to co-producer. So
Right.
explain to everybody what that means.
Well, I mean, we finished the recording the first week of November last year, and then it came time to comping the different takes, figuring out which were the best takes. If
Mm.
we had to do any overdubs or re-records of the vocals, which we did. For example, the tenor soloist couldn't go to London with us, so we had to
Oh,
record him out of New York,
wow.
uh, and he recorded both versions, the orchestral recording and the chamber recording that we had done prior. And he was just phenomenal and delivered with, I mean, just like one take on everything. He was
Wow.
just a stellar musician. So yeah, so there's the overdubbing that goes on, and then the editing and the mixing, and then the back and forth of getting other people's opinions on what do you think of the mix? Well, what do you think of the mix? And
All
then
right.
bringing vocals up, bringing them down. It's just there was sometimes misplacing files between different producers and Pro Tools sessions crashing or things.
Right.
Anyway, so after the recording itself, to answer your question, we spent 150 hours at least.
Or at least.
At least that's probably a conservative estimate. As a co-producer, putting the pieces together in this format with the engineers.
Yeah, so that's, man, that's a whole thing goes into it, folks, of the producers and the co-producers and the arrangers and the composers. And,
Yeah.
you're looking at one of the greats in the biz here, Robert Thies. He's amazing. And I love that new album, the Mythologies II record. And one of these days, man, if your schedule or my schedule ever slows down, we got to meet up at my favorite piano store at Classic Pianos and do two Bosendorfers and just because I'm well known for ruining a lot of great classical pieces. I destroyed Fur-Elise and Sonata Pathétique number 2, second movement, all that stuff. So, but it's great to have you on the show. And just to wrap things up, do you have any advice for young musicians that want to be you when they grow up one day? What would you tell them? Because I just tell people, don't even bother. Business is too hard. It'd be a lot easier to just, be a janitor because you always know you're getting that $8,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a tough reality to make a living as a musician. Of course, there's a sacrifice, and I don't know that I'll ever retire, for example.
Uh-huh.
But you basically don't do it unless you have such a fire in you and such a passion, and you cannot imagine doing anything else with your life.
Okay.
Be curious, learn, draw from as many different experiences as you can. Listen to music all the time, different kinds of music. I think that's a lot of what formed my personality was just going to my public library back in the early 80s and just bringing home a stack of LPs from the jazz soundtracks, film music, all world music. Just, what's this? This looks cool. And I discovered some of the most incredible music that way, just being curious. This is, of course, before we had Spotify and you could stay at home. But I just look at some of the younger students and I'm a little disappointed sometimes by the lack of curiosity. But
Well, yeah, I think that's partially because of the internet age, and Spotify certainly is not helpful if I'm trying to recommend music or have music recommended to me, because they're always pushing, a robot who's an alias that's got 150 Spotify accounts, never writing their own music, using AI and making $1 million, and I struggle along with my little jazz stuff. And I
right.
don't really need Herbie Hancock or Chick Corea recommended to me anymore. Um, I've been inspired to love these guys, but at this point, I'm really trying to do my own thing. Well, I can't thank you enough, Robert, for coming on, and I wish you all the best. You're up for a Grammy for Classical Compendium. Is
That's
that what
right.
it is this year?
Yes.
And you've also got a improvisational piano thing I got to check out.
Yeah, that's in the New Age category. It's a ongoing project called Blue Landscapes. And so
Blue Landscapes.
so
All right. Well, on that note, folks, we're going to wrap it up. We've had an amazing time today. Robert, thank you so much for coming on, and
Thank you.
best of luck this Grammy season. And let's get together sometime in person.
Love that. Thanks, Rob.
All right. Bye
Okay.
bye now.